What's up, guys? Welcome back to Product Parade, where today we have another extraordinary product leader to chat with. Jeff Clark is currently the group product manager at AppCues, but I got to know him when he was the VP of product at Inside Tracker. Jeff is an incredible product leader because he inspires his team to ship amazing product. And not only that, he has an expertise in the startup realm. Not only has he built his own very cool niche product, but he typically joins smaller stage startups, which we'll talk about in the interview. So with all of that being said, let's jump into the interview. I guess on the topic of you actually bringing a new PM onto your team right now, I would love to know, what do you look for when hiring a product manager?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing that I think is overlooked when people talk about like how to get hired as a PM and how to like hire a PM, there's this like tenacity that is so hard to miss. Sorry, it's so easy to miss and it's so hard to kind of communicate in an interview because I think everyone's going to come in with a base level of technical ability and probably some base level of business ability. And you're going to be able to like flesh these things out in the written assignments and even, some of the interviews. But whenever I'm looking to hire someone, like I'm looking to hire someone who has like tenacity and drive. You always see it in the job requirements as these like self-starters. I'm like, how do you identify a self-starter? And I think the way you can identify a self-starter is understanding like what kind of they do outside of work too. So, have they launched, I don't know, a surfing app or a little photo app or, something like that where they have some kind of interest and then they do something about it. There's nothing wrong with these PMs who are like, I do PM at work and after work, I don't do PM stuff. Totally fine. The stages of the companies that I like to work at are typically earlier stage. And so we need people who can, they say be gritty or whatever. They can be gritty, but really I think it's this tenacity to see a problem and then to just try to address it, like see what happens. It's perfectly fine if you mess it up and you fail or, your app doesn't take off or whatever it is. But like you tried it and you tried really hard because you're going to learn something from that and you're going to have a good story to tell after that.
Yeah, and well, I really like that point. And you're working from home. My question is, how do you show that tenacity through a Zoom call to be able to be like, and like obviously you said, oh, you have an idea for an app and you took it off. Like you can clearly say that and that, sparks some of that. But
Yeah.
how do you show a hiring manager or other peers that you potentially would meet through Zoom that you're like, that you can really do it and you're kind of a rock star?
You ever talk to somebody and you can just tell that the topic they're talking about, they're very into it. And they have like they're leaning in and they're kind of smiling while they're talking about it and they're kind of getting amped like this. You can tell when someone is like super into something by the way that they're communicating about it. And I think that's easy to fake, right? I was kind of faking it right there as I was doing it to you. But whenever you start to dig into some of the details behind the problem that they have, you start to see like they really, really understand it. And when you talk about what they were doing about it, you can get an understanding about like how deep they went, how hard they tried, and really how much they were into it. So I think the core of really any good interview and really like a good characteristic for a good PM is the ability to tell a compelling story. And I think if you want to showcase your tenacity, make sure you have a really good story talking about, what you were trying to do, all the things that you tried to do to solve it, whether or not you solved it, if it failed, why do you think it failed? But just like show some of the energy within that and be sincere about it. I also think it's perfectly fine to say, I tried this and tried this and tried this, and I got halfway through and wasn't interested and dropped it. Right. I think there's, while that may not show your tenacity, it's going to showcase a different kind of characteristic. But I think it's good for someone who's interviewing to be able to like show that like there are two sides to my coin. I'm not just like amped up all the time about everything I'm working on.
Yeah.
But I think that's it. I think it comes down to like the story aspect of it, being able to show that you're very into it, and then be specific around the steps you took to whatever it was, launch your app or get your first user, your first 100 users, or your first dollar, whatever the case is.
Yeah. Well, and another question I had to follow up on this is, what are you looking for from somebody potentially just coming out of college or potentially switching careers to be able to come in and say, hey, I want to start a product career? They don't have much experience. And usually those guys are brought on as like associate product managers or interns or whatever, and may have some experience. But what would you give as advice to somebody that's, just doesn't have any product experience yet that potentially they could show some tenacity or an idea that they tried to chase down? Or do you think that's kind of like you should have at least maybe tried something no matter where you're at?
I like to see someone that's tried something. I
Hmm.
mean, at the very, very, very least, they should have a case study of something that they thought about trying.
Hmm.
But honestly, like that's very rarely going to pass my my like sniff test, unless obviously they came through, a trusted friend or a colleague who's like, this guy's smart. He hasn't done anything, but he has something written up. Okay, fine, I'll give him the first interview. But if you roll in and you're like, I've launched this product, or I am building this app, or even if maybe it's not necessarily product stuff, but let's say you're coming out of college and you were the president of the econ club or whatever, and you can talk about how you grew the membership of that econ club 2x over the course of your tenure, and the way you did that was X, Y, and Z, and have like the same structured thought process and show that you took a problem and solved it. I think that's enough for me to go like they understand how to identify a problem. They understand how to solve a problem. And hopefully that story communicates that they're able to rally a team of people that obviously doesn't necessarily report to them to be able to solve that problem successfully with them.
Yeah, I really like that because that's what I was just thinking. I'm like, even if you're in college, because what product management really is all about is you, like what you said, you identify a problem and then just not having like exactly clear goals or clear requirements. You have to like go and define what could potentially solve that problem and then get buy-in from other people. And, it's just something you automatically do. So if your brain's already working like that, then you probably have some type of story, that you could at least bring to the interview. I was even thinking I threw like this party in college, and it was like this huge party. Probably 3,000 people came to it. Like the
Wow.
cops, yeah, like the cops came, shut it down. Like it was crazy. But I'm like, even then, it like we put a lot of work into when we thought that the party needed to happen. Why? Because like there wasn't another party happening to like meet a lot of people. And then we went out and invited, this was like very early Facebook time, So like we went
Yeah.
out and invited a ton of people just by hand, handing out flyers, mass group texts. And so I'm like, even then, I guess you could come up with a story that's like,
Oh,
hey, look, there was a problem and I did this to solve it. And I worked with these people to be able to make it happen.
yeah. Yeah.
And it was awesome. So I always ran into people throughout like the rest of my college career because I was a freshman when I did it.
Yeah.
And they all like remembered that party as like kind of an iconic party for people. And even when I've run into people nowadays, like that, they're like, "Oh my gosh, I remember that party." Like, I don't know what happened, but it like went viral. Like the whole basketball team was there, the whole football team, like everybody was there, and it was awesome.
I am not surprised at all that you were able to, as a freshman, go like, I want to throw a huge party and get 3,000 people to show up. Now, I am very interested in what's a 3,000 person party look like at BYU, but
Well, yeah, I mean, we don't need to get into it too much, but it was also at a house. So it was like a house party in their backyard. And there was people were telling me that they had parked like a mile away because all the streets were lined. Like nearby churches, the parking lots had completely filled. So it was crazy. And then apparently the cops came and they're out on the street trying to figure out what's going on, trying to like figure out what
yeah.
is happening. And so my one of my buddies had saw the police, and then he came around the back and he just jumped the fence to get in, and then he came and told me, he's like, hey, the police are out there trying to like shut things down. So it actually was getting out of hand. So the police shutting it down kind of helped us to some degree, where it wasn't like, anyway, the backyard that it was in was
Yeah,
completely ruined, but
yeah.
it was a good time.
And I bet like the cops showing up even like escalated in people's minds the epicness of that party.
Yep,
That's awesome.
100%. 100%. I guess back to actual product stuff. Um, I'm loving the advice going from like not being in product to being in product. What do you think sets apart a product manager from a senior product manager? And kind of like, hey, I've now been a product manager potentially a few years, and I want to jump into the seniority space. What, like, where do you think that line is?
So imagine the mental model that's in my head is at the core, you have like a PO or an APM, right? Maybe a PM, but essentially as you grow in title, these rings get bigger as you grow in responsibility. So like let's say a PO or an APM is responsible for a specific feature, right? Or maybe it's even just like the delivery aspect of a specific team if they're really, really junior. And as they grow, they're responsible for a feature. And PM to SPM is maybe responsible for a set of features. And SPM to, group product manager is responsible for, or product director is responsible for like, a specific product, like these rings of responsibility out there. I think that in order for you to move from a PM mindset to an SPM mindset, you kind of have to expand your mind on what you care about. And it's not necessarily just that this feature is good, whatever good means in that context, but like understanding and be able to communicate up and out how that feature helps solve a bigger problem. So an example would be whenever I was just like a PM, I was responsible for this bookmark feature, right? And when I was working on that specifically, everything was about how to make that bookmark feature really good.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, I'm sitting in a meeting with other PMs, and my boss was talking about like it was a content site, just talking about the general content site, and point blank asked me like why the bookmarks are important and why it's important. Like he knew the answer, but he just kind of wanted to set the context for everybody, and I fumbled it big time. And after, our one-on-one that was a couple days later after that, he's like, you need to understand that. And it was like a light switch in my mind where it was like, I didn't understand why bookmarks was important. I never thought about it. I was so focused on just the bookmark itself. But expanding into there and saying bookmarks is an integral part to our content management system because of engagement and all these other little things, kind of expanded my mind. And all of a sudden I'm having a conversation with the people that are in that context. And as I've been kind of rising in titles and increasing in responsibility, the one thing that's become more and more common is that as you go up, you need to start thinking broader about things, which makes sense because if you look all the way up at a VP or a CPO, you're going like they're responsible for the entire product portfolio and understanding how that moves the business. Right. And so you come all the way down, you're like, what is the smaller scope of that all the way down and down and down? And I think it's a really important question to ask when you're interviewing for a job on kind of what those roles and responsibilities, how they're different from each other, because you'll get an understanding of one, like actually what the job is, because PM titles they're everywhere. An SPM at one company is a VP of product at a different company because of all kinds of things. But the other thing is you'll get an understanding of the org structure of the product team, which will help you understand like what is my responsibility going to be, and also what's my trajectory if I want to grow within this company.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense. What about once you start hitting a certain level of seniority and leadership and responsibility, I think one interesting thing from being like a product leader, you start picking up other teams that aren't necessarily product management. For example, design,
Yeah.
and maybe you have other examples, but the one that immediately comes to mind is, hey, you're now the director of product or the VP of product, and the UX designers and the visual designers or the product designers, whatever you have on your team, are now under your purview to some degree, or sometimes completely under your purview. How do you move from managing and coming from an organization that you're like, I know product management, and yes, I work closely with designers, but I've never managed design. And now also typically you become the final sign off for design in a lot of ways. So
Yeah.
how does your mind have to change when you start taking on new groups, like new teams?
I think it depends on what your experience is like. So I'll break it into two simple areas, which is one, I have experience in this area, and the other is I don't have experience in this area. And we'll use design as the example. In design, if you have experience in that area, you can be more involved in the actual design and having design related conversations with your designers. You'll probably have you ever heard of this like T-shaped skill set for PMs or anybody?
Maybe. What is it?
Okay. So yeah, imagine a set of skills for a PM across the board, technical, business, UX, all these things down the road. PMs typically, especially earlier in their career, are T-shaped. Like they have basic understanding of all of these things, and then they're really good at one thing.
Hmm.
Right. That could be if they came from being an engineer, it could be that. If they came from an MBA, it could be business stuff, design, whatever.
Yep, got it.
So in the case where you're, now taking responsibility for a new area and the PM org typically does contain design. So we'll use that example. If you come from a design background, you can have these deeper conversations with your design managers and your designers within there. And so you can be more involved. And I think that's good. I think what you end up seeing is like you guys, bouncing back and forth and on ideas and trying to get good things out the door, but also just working well together as a design org. That makes sense. Like if you have a design background, that's probably not even the point of your question. But if you don't have a design background and you're being asked to now be responsible for the design group, there's a level of trust that you're going to have in your design managers. And because you don't have a design background, you might have good taste, but you don't understand the execution side as well as maybe your more seasoned designers do. So there's a level of trust that needs to go in there. And the way to think about that is to identify the people that you need to trust, but also empower them to make the decisions on your behalf, right? Good management advice across the board, but for designers specifically, it's coming in and saying, what's our, design culture today? Do we work in components? Do we have guidelines? What's the general maturity of the design org? And working with the leaders of your design group to help fix the things that need to be fixed and progress that group forward. So ultimately, I think it comes down to how deep you get involved with these people. And based on that, it's how much trust do you put in the senior leaders of that group to be able to kind of like help define the culture. So if you don't come from a design background, you probably have your senior design manager, your design director, or whatever the top role is in design that rolls up to you. And it's being super clear with those guys. Here's where I see our design culture being weak. Here's where I want to see it fixed. And because you are that next level up, here's why it's important. Here's how it merges in with product and how it merges in with marketing, merges in with sales, and why those things are important to each other, and really helping those guys understand the context of their role and why it's important. And I think under the hood, it's ultimately trying to get them to take over the design aspect of your job entirely.
Yeah, so you used the word empower,
Yeah.
and I think that is one of the most like broadly used words potentially in
Yeah.
product. They're like, oh, empower product managers, empowered product teams, empower the designers and design leadership. What do you like? How do you empower a
Yeah.
team, and how do you empower product managers? Like, what does that mean, and how should a product manager take that?
What a question. I think you're right that it's like, it's one of these like crazy loaded terms. And, people, I mean, at least the people that I talk to that I want to work with, they always talk about empower product teams and empower this and empower that. And when the rubber hits the road, I think what they're ultimately saying is like, we're going to give you decision-making responsibility on the areas that are important for you to be successful at your job. And it means it's going to have to be super clear what it means to be successful in your role at your job. And so I think if you're really empowering someone to do it, you need to be clear about a few things. It's what exactly you want. So, whether hopefully it's the outcome because you're empowering them to solve a problem. So you need to make clear what the problem is, how you know it's going to be solved, and when you want it. I think that's really good just for delegating tasks anyway. And a lot of people, and the fourth one is how you want it delivered. Yeah. Right. So like, it's very easy to be like, Dallin, I need to, geez, I'm going to come up with this on the top of my head. I need to know what you're going to do about localization. And I think a less senior manager would be like, I've empowered Dallin to make that call. Now, if you go away, it takes you 6 months and you come back with a half a page Google Doc, like maybe that's what I expected. It's unlikely not going to be what I expected. I'm already disappointed in you. I'm going to start reining in your empowerment, I guess, right? But if I come out of the gate and I say, Dallin, I want to plan for localization, and my expectation is, 2 to 3 page Google Doc that I can skim with the executive team to understand the investment we need to make into it, and I need it in 2 weeks. To you, you're going to be like, I know exactly what the expectation is on this. If you don't think 2 to 3 weeks is reasonable, you're going to say something. If you don't think 2 to 3 pages is reasonable, you're going to say something. If you have questions about it, you're going to say something. And the conversation rolls like that, and you're going to come back. And if you've met those expectations, you're empowered. You get to make the decision on things. Yeah. If you don't hit that, then we need to talk about expectations and performance, Yeah. But I think the way to empower people is to clearly tell them what you want, when you want it, how you want it, and then trust them to make the decision, but also hold them accountable for the decision they're making, right? And the example that I give you about localization, I think it'd actually be ridiculous to be like, give me a plan for localization, right? More specifically, I would ask you, I want to know the general scope of it. I want to know the general cost, whether it's time or finance or whatever it is. And I want I want to see those options, and I want your recommendation on it. And you would come back and say, here's what we got, and here's what I want to do. And be like, okay, let's have a discussion about the recommendation. I'm not asking you to give me all the options. I'm asking you to tell me what you would do.
You're making a good point, especially the case study. Like the case study in interviews, I don't know how I feel about it, honestly.
Yeah.
And that's because I feel like a lot of times it's purposefully asking you something very vague, trying to make you see like your level of seniority, because they're going to say, I mean, maybe it is good, but they're going to say, hey, give me a plan for localization. And that's it. They'll leave it right there. So you could take away, hey, is this how leadership works at this company? Because if it is, then it's kind of like, well, I don't want to necessarily work with somebody that can't give me, more clearly defined not requirements, but just like a timeline and a little bit more on the deliverable. And then they kind of they want you to start breaking down, if I'm not wrong, but they want to be like, okay, well, localization, like what's the goal of the company? What's our timeline here? What resources do I have to work with?
Yeah.
But I guess, is that if you do have a less senior leader and you're kind of like, hey, I don't understand those requirements, is that the role of the PM to then say, try and figure all of that out, asking more clarifying questions, or to what degree do they have to be responsible for that, which obviously their job's on the line?
Yeah. No leader worth their weight is upset about questions, especially clarifying questions. And I think I have so many mixed feelings about case studies during interviews. And I have done them, and I even give them to people that apply. And here's what I like about the case study. Let's go on tangent about case studies for a second. What I like about the case study is it actually gives you a sense into how the company is run, and gives you a sense on whether or not you want to work there. And I'll give you an example. There was it right after Inside Tracker? It was within the last couple of years. I was on a job hunt, and a friend of mine introed me to this guy that was starting a health tech company in Cambridge. And we introed, and I was like, I like the guy. He's like, you'd be our first head of product. And so And he was like, I don't know anything about product, but my brother does, yellow flag. And He's like, so, he proposed this case study and he would like you to do this case, and he gave me specifics on it. It was a well thought out case study. And so I'm sitting up here and I'm working on it, and it's just a grind. I don't remember the specifics of the case study, but it was just a grind. And I just found myself going like, I don't care about this. You know what I mean? And so what I did was, and I thought to myself, I was like, this is the best it's ever going to be. There's no pressure from anyone to do well on this. I don't need to convince anyone of anything. I just need to write a 2-page doc for them real quick. And I was like, this sucks. And I'm like, this is what the company's going to be like, or the business is going to be like. So I wrote him an email and I was like, I don't want to do this. Like, sorry, like I'm out. And he called me and he didn't try to convince me. He's just like, why not? And I told him all the reasons why. And he was like, oh man. And he said, like, that's what we need in a product role, is for someone to be kind of critical of it. And I'm like, yeah, but it's not for me, right? Still friends with that guy, by the way. Anyway, whenever I'm giving a case study to somebody, it is intentionally vague. And it is a little bit of that is to be understand their seniority level. And I think you can very clearly understand someone's seniority level by the questions they ask. So if you're getting a case study as part of an interview process, a lot of people will just take it and they'll tappy, 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 and then they'll send you an email in a couple of days with a Google Doc. And like, you know, is it good? Is it bad? One of the things I tell them is like, the specifics of the case study matter very little. I'm not looking for the right solution. What I'm trying to do is understand your thought process. And a big part of the thought process is being clear around what the ask is and how to deliver the right thing to the right people. So I make it super clear to them what I want the deliverable to be, but the deliverable to be. But the case study itself is relatively vague because I want them to ask questions about it. Why is this important? When you said this, what do you mean? Do we have any other customer data about this? What's the skill set of the engineering team? Like whatever's important in the case study. So I think it's important, if you get a case study, understand it is intentionally vague, and also understand that part of the reason they give you something intentionally vague is because they want to understand your thought process. And a big part of that is giving you the opportunity to ask clarifying questions, because I'm going to get a sense of like where your brain starts to go. And that's ultimately what the case study is about. Like, how are they going to work on this very micro thing? And can we extrapolate that into my expectations of how they would be as an employee for 3 years?
What if they give what seems like a pretty specific case study that you're like, is that still something where you're like, you read it through? Because I actually have gotten one of these actually pretty recently where it's like, I read it through it and it seemed like pretty specific, where it's like, okay, it's pretty obvious what they want. What do you think they're looking for in that situation or in that scenario? Do they still want to see clarifying or potentially more clarifying questions, even though it seems, because you don't want to ask questions that it's like, hey, that's obvious, dummy, but you just want to show them that you're trying to think, you're trying to be actively engaged in this.
Yeah.
Or is it more about then the deliverable, about how you document, how you write user stories, I guess like how you kind of put it all together?
Yeah, it's both, right? So like I think it's perfectly reasonable to say, I understand this completely, right? And so the other stuff is totally important. How you document, what your user stories are, like how you identify the risks, all those kinds of things. I think it's just riskier that way. Now, if you really have absolutely no questions at all, then don't ask clarifying questions. You know what I mean? Depending on the way that they wrote the case study, they may think we've got everything in here and they're looking for a very specific answer to this case study. And they want to see if you get there. That is the reddest blinking red flag I've ever seen in my entire life, though.
Yeah.
Because what they want to see is like, what do they want to see? What they want to see is like, does this guy agree with us? And the way that I would interpret that as a product manager or a product leader is like, maybe it's not okay to be super critical about management's decisions at this company. If it's really just a game to see if you get to the right answer, it's not a case study.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm actually like, if we had more time, I'm like, I want to pull up this case study because it was probably the first case study where I was like, it seems pretty specific. I'm like, I don't know if and they're a very small company, right? So they don't even have like they don't have a product person yet. It's founder, kind of the
Yeah.
same type of company that you are, that you work with a lot. So, it's kind of like, well, is this just to show how we can make the founder's life easier, who's kind of making, and maybe that's what it is. It's kind of like the founder's making a lot of the large decisions about priority and what we're working on next, and they need someone that's like a product assistant that can kind of go through and maybe bounce some ideas off of them and think about it a little bit, but more work with the development team and just run that half of the business
Yeah.
for them so they don't have to think about it.
Yeah, God, man, I wish we had time. I have strong opinions around that. And they're not all good and they're not all bad. I think I think you're right though. Like you can read into the role that they expect the person to do by reading into the case study. And, like I think what I've noticed is that is and even in our case, like that's a representation of the work that we expect this role to fulfill. And so if you're digging into that and you're like, there's an answer here, I need to figure it out and like help them basically break that into product development, and you're okay with that role, then like nail it. But I like pay attention to the case study. And if you start to see those things and you're like, man, this is not the role that I want, pull out. Because you're like in 100% of the cases in my experience, those yellow and red flags that pop up in an interview process are accurate 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Like trust your gut.
And what about I've heard PMs, especially like on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I wouldn't have the audacity to do it, but complain that a case study is like free labor, where they're like, oh, these guys just want me to do this. It's probably what they're working on next. And at least when I was hiring, I did do something that we were working on, but it was something we had already made a decision on.
Yeah.
And so it was just very fresh in the entire team's mind. So, I wanted it to be when they interview with the designer and other key stakeholders, it's just a topic that's already fresh in everybody's minds so that they can see how they're thinking about it. But really the goal was just to see how they're thinking about it. I guess, have you ever seen a situation, or would you ever do that where it's like, hey, it's something we're actually working on and we don't have a decision, and we'll use this person that's interviewing with us to help us bring in a third or fourth opinion, aka free labor?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't do it for a couple of reasons. Is one, I don't think that's fair and reasonable, because if we've been working on this for weeks or months and haven't got to a good solution, this person that we're interviewing, that we're asking to spend 1 to 2 hours on and go from zero context to a good solution, like the chances that they're going to give you a good idea, of the right idea, are very slim. How many times have you gone from I have a problem to I have a fully functioning solution that's ready to be worked on in 2 hours? Like it's never ever happened.
Right.
And so I don't think that's fair for that to happen. But also I think there's two ways to go with the case study. One is the other way that you mentioned, which is like let's put a problem that we have recently dealt with in front of them to see how they would handle it, just so we could see how they would work in our system. Like, do they think the same way we do, but do they think in a way that is productive and additional to our thought process? Or you go completely the opposite. Like, I want something completely different. There was a case study. Maybe this was at Inside Tracker, actually. I don't remember where. No, it wasn't Inside Tracker. It was at Super Now. The case study was basically around YouTube. Well, it was completely unrelated to what we were working on. And the point of that was like, not a lot of people are going to have context into a Super Now problem, or an Inside Tracker problem, or an AppCues problem, or whatever. But everyone's kind of used YouTube before. So they kind of already understand YouTube. And so we're asking you to put your thinking hat on and be like, how would we solve this problem? I think it was YouTube getting into podcasts is actually what it was. So like, what do you do about that? I don't remember the specifics of the case study right now, but what do you do about that? And it was very clear to them that like, we don't know the answer. We're really not judging you on the answer, because we're not YouTube, we're not podcasts. We don't actually care about the answer. It's very much about understanding how you think and how you document and how you communicate. And our case studies were a seed to a conversation. We didn't take your case study interpret it, and go like you're in. We would say your case study is the seed to the conversation. You're going to have two meetings after the case study. One is with me and our lead engineer, or one of our senior engineers, about the case study. And the second meeting is going to be with me and one of our designers about the case study. And both of them are workshops in different ways. So what we can take is this 1 hour that you put into thought of this, and then actually sit you in front of someone who would theoretically be on your team, and see how as we poke holes in your case study and you respond to conflict and work through a problem with them, like, how was your thought process, but also like, how do you work with the team as they challenge you, and how do you make additional progress on this together as a team?
Yeah.
And so I think this very specific, people use case studies in completely different ways. I think this very specific case study with a solution, an expected solution at the end, is unfair. It's unfair to the company because I think they're wasting their time trying to get a solution for 2 hours out of somebody for free. I think it's unfair to the candidate big time because they don't know anything and they're kind of shooting in the dark. Everyone else has months or years of context, and you've got 1 to 2 hours.
Yeah. And switching directions from case study real quick. What do you make of the current tech environment, and where do you think the opportunity will be? Like, is there opportunity in the market right now for brand new product managers, especially since there's so much competition with, the big players laying tens of thousands of people off? Amazon,
Yeah.
Microsoft, Google, there's tens and tens of I don't know if it could be up to like 100,000 or more of people that used to work in tech companies. We're even finally hearing that engineers have been getting laid off, which that used to be like engineers will never get laid off,
Right.
unless they like are deliberately trying to get laid off.
Right.
But what do you make of the tech environment right now?
I think there's a lot of supply, right? Everyone's been laid off. Well, that's not fair to say. There's a lot of people that are getting laid off at companies of all sizes. The big companies are saying we overspent. The small companies are getting shut down. There's a lot of jobs out there right now. I think it's a really tough market for a brand new PM. And I think that's where this tenacity and proof that you've done it before, whether or not it's specific product management or not, is to your advantage, because you're up against right now you're up against a lot of people with a lot of experience. The other side of that is you're up against a lot of people with other experience and high expectations for salary. If you're coming right out of college, you're priced a little bit differently than the guy who's coming out of a Series C startup. And so I think, ultimately that comes down to the company and like what they're hiring for and what their priorities are and things like that. I think it's tough. It's not a market that I would want to be in right now. Especially as you move up and roll, there's less and less of those job opportunities available. So I think the way to break through it is start something, play with something, whatever it is. Obviously, generative AI and LLMs and all that kind of stuff are a hot topic right now. And I think people are starting to say, like, this isn't Bitcoin. This is kind of a real thing. So, I would say probably spend some time learning about, generative AI and just all the AI models overall, and like how to build a product with AI. The second thing is, and I hate this so much, but the second thing is like lean on your network. It's the best jobs that I've ever got were direct referrals from friends. And typically they were the ones that worked there. And so you could say like, oh my gosh, like Eric works here. I love Eric. He's a member of the executive team. My guess is the executive team thinks and acts and has a culture that's similar to Eric's personality. Like, that's a good shoe-in. Plus you have a shoe-in from someone who works there, which will get you past all the resume screeners and HR people.
Yep.
So yeah, I would say like the market is tough right now, no doubt about it. And it's probably going to get a little tougher. Like, things slow down in the summer.
Yeah.
But what am I trying to say? Market is tough right now. Pick up a side project, start writing, reach out to your network. Like, because the things that are going to get you past the screens, remember these guys, because supply is so high right now, you post a job on LinkedIn, right? Post a job on LinkedIn, you're going to get 150 applicants in the first 4 hours. 99% of them will suck, like be absolutely terrible, because there are people that are just kind of spamming jobs, which is fine and reasonable, I suppose. What you got to do is figure out a way to get around those guys. And the best way of doing that is either through a warm intro, obviously, or second is by like showing that you either have domain experience or you're a go-getter and you've got that tenacity and that experience to, or that tenacity and that drive to do something, to stand out, and you're not just like a flat resume.
And you mentioned AI. What in 10 minutes, we have about like 5 to 10 minutes left.
Yeah.
What is going on with AI? Do you have any examples of tools that PM should be using right now that
Yeah.
utilize AI? Like, have you like started working AI into your daily or weekly leadership routine? If so, how?
I've been trying to, I'll tell you that. So AI is obviously, the generative AI is like in its infancy right now, right? And it just had a gigantic leap, what, 4 months ago, 5 months ago, something like that. Like GPT and all those, they existed before, but in the last few months, they became like they kind of leveled up in their power, but also the price dropped dramatically. So it's within reach of anybody with a small to moderate budget to use. And so much of it is free, right? Bing has it baked in for using Edge and Bing, and so you can just ask that thing anything you want. We're at AppCues, we're actively trying to figure out how to use AI to our customers' advantage, and we have some ideas that we're hashing through and pitching and trying to see what it is. I think what we end up seeing a lot of people doing, especially in the product adoption space, is going, we'll use AI to generate text and images for your app. And our customers are like, oh, we don't trust you to do that. It's nothing against the product. It's like AI is still AI, and everyone knows that they hallucinate and that that's a big problem for us. So what we're trying to do, and what I think a big opportunity is how do you, this is going to sound ridiculous, but like, how do you use this generative AI in a unique and compelling way that isn't the same as what everyone else is doing? Now, that's not necessarily a hot take, and that's probably a couple steps away. But the first thing to do is to like try to use it like everyone else is using it, like try to generate stuff. And I think one of the things that I use it for on a regular basis is to handle my email. So, I know Slack has it built in, or they can like, whatever, summarize all your Slacks or whatever over the last few days. But what I do is when, I want to write an email to someone and ask them for feedback, or I want to set up an interview or something with it, like I'll just run over to ChatGPT real quick and like give the bot a quick summary and be like, please write me a friendly email that requests them to schedule a thing with me, a meeting with me. And it'll spit out something that's 95% accurate, right? So I scan it and I go, cool, paste it in, send it off. And that works pretty well for me. The one thing that I did recently was I gave it, I needed a SQL query. I needed to know something, and I'm relatively new here. I've only been here 3 months, and so I don't totally understand our whole data schema and how everything works yet. So I went into ChatGPT and I told it the schema of the database and of these tables and the answer that I want from it. And I said, just give me a SQL query that'll give me this. And it read it and it spit it out, and I dropped it right in and it worked perfectly. And that part is amazing to me. And I think there's something here, and I wish, like, I don't know, I've been kicking around this idea and I wish someone would have it, but like imagine this world where you could have a ChatGPT like interface on top of all of your data, on top of your mix panel and your Snowflake and all these, your segment and your customer IO and all these areas where you have data, and you can go in and say, yo, chatbot, tell me the average value of customers who have done event X in the last 30 days on a mobile device, which we all know is like, it's a reasonable question to ask if you have all the data in a structured SQL table and you understand SQL and how all the data connects together. It's the perfect use case for something simple like a chatbot. Yeah. Maybe not a chatbot, but like an LLM to basically be like, I understand how it all fits together. Maybe you told me one time, maybe I'm just making some assumptions, and I can bake it all together and spit it out to you. And imagine how much easier your life as a PM would be if you didn't have to download spreadsheets from various places and try to unify them together so you can ask it a question that's already out of date because there's new data that came in while you were trying to do that. I
Yeah.
think there's power in there for PMs, and I think the generative stuff is fine, but I think the ability to use that to drive and make decisions based on data is where the power is at. I'll give you one more example. We do an NPS, and we do NPS, and we also have like churn reasons from Salesforce. They're all verbatim responses. And so one of the things that I do weekly is I take those and drop them into Chat GPT. I'm like, summarize this into 5 bullet points for me.
Mm.
And it does it. And it does it with amazing accuracy. There's no hallucinations there that I've found so far in the last 6 weeks that I've been doing that.
Yeah.
And then it makes it real easy to like send that out to the team and be like, you don't have to parse through 350 verbatim NPS responses. Here's the 5 bullet points. Now let's have a conversation around what to do with that.
Yeah, I mean that'll save companies so much time and money. As especially like you get surveys. When I
Mhm.
was at AccuWeather, we had thousands of people responding to our surveys. So then it's like
Yeah.
someone would then go back and take weeks, like 3 or 4 weeks before they came back, and they're like, "All right, I've now been through all of them. I've organized all of this data. Here's what it's saying." And you know what? Even when you do that, it still can be subjective,
Yeah.
where it's like they feel like they're noticing one thing more often than other, whatever. So unless they're very, very good at their job, it can really like quickly roll into something that it's good data, but it's also potentially a little subjective,
Yeah.
where a machine just doesn't care about specific words. It's just going to count those words or count those sentiments
Yeah.
and then spit that back.
That you got to be a little careful. Like the LLMs, it still have they're not completely objective,
Mhm.
right? Like the way the way they work are basically on pattern matching and trying to say like this is the most logical pattern that I picked up out of here, but that's still programmed by humans.
True.
And even the data is or the model is trained by humans. Now, it's so much data that one human having a strong opinion isn't going to sway it all that much. But that's really what the hallucinations are in these models is like they just made the wrong calculation or they made a calculation that was inconsistent. And I think that's the risk in doing this. But if you're taking thousands of survey responses and saying like boil it down into 5 themes or whatever the case is, you're going to get it in seconds instead of weeks. And so your trade-off here is like, okay, it may not be as accurate as someone who did a deep data analysis on it, but maybe we don't need that level of accuracy from these survey responses if
Yeah.
we're just trying to get a sense of general sentiment and temperature of our customers.
Yeah, and you know what? A lot of times getting data and acquiring good data gets pushed off because leadership is like, hey, we need to make a decision. We don't have 4 weeks to go parse
Yeah.
through all of this. So we need to make a decision. So sometimes you just don't even do the research to go get the data in the first place. So it's like at least now that it's taking seconds rather than weeks, even if it's not perfect, uh,
Yeah.
it can hopefully add another data point
Yeah.
to help you make a decision, right? And, and
Yeah.
and it also builds up. This is a big issue I see lots of times with early stage companies is the founder still wants to drive things, and it's hard to go from your idea and something that you completely own and you make all the decisions to now you have real data that needs to help you drive and empower decisions.
Totally.
And so, like it can create a more data driven culture within the company, which is I think huge for product management in general.
Totally is. Totally is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's cool opportunities with this stuff with data. I think it's no one's cracked it yet, but there are a lot of people that are trying to, including me.
Hey, yeah. Well, I feel like we're leaving a lot on the table. Like we kind of went on a few tangents, but I had a lot of questions I wanted to ask you, and I know we're out of time, but thank you so much for hopping on and taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime, dude.